Wondering how you can eat vegetarian or vegan on your trip to Italy, or do you want to avoid lactose and nuts? In part 2 of our chat about travelling in Italy with food allergies, intolerances, and preferences, we dive into these areas so you can plan ahead to have an absolutely delicious trip. Let's find out how in episode 260 of the Untold Italy podcast.
Ciao a tutti and benvenuti to Untold Italy, the travel podcast where you go to the towns and villages, mountains and lakes, hills and coastlines of Bella Italia. Each week your host, Katy Clarke, takes you on a journey in search of magical landscapes, history, culture, wine, gelato, and of course, a whole lot of pasta. If you're dreaming of Italy and planning future adventures there, you've come to the right place.
Ciao a tutti! Hello friends and welcome to Fabulous February. It's warm and sunny here in Australia where I'm based, but I know many of you are shivering through a cold winter, so a big shout out to you, and I hope you're keeping busy dreaming about Italy and the many wonderful adventures you're going to have there. A couple of weeks ago, we aired part 1 of my discussion with my friend Nesim from Full Belly Tours in Rome about eating and managing allergies and food preferences when you're in Italy. In that episode, which is number 258, we took a look at some general principles to consider when planning your trip, as well as gluten-free options and addressing seafood and nut allergies. So if you missed that and it applies to you, go ahead and take a listen to that first. In part 2, we continue the discussion to assist those of you interested in vegetarian and vegan options, as well as those experiencing lactose intolerance. Before we begin, though, I want to remind our listeners that while we are here to provide tips and ideas to make the most of your time in Italy, we are not doctors or health professionals, and you should always seek their advice first if you're unsure about how certain foods will impact your health. Nazim, what about our vegetarians? So many people are giving up meat these days. So if you're a vegetarian, what's in it for you?
Many local restaurants, as I was saying, especially the old school, kind of more established ones, will probably expect you to make do with the vegetables on offer, which are normally just side dishes, and may genuinely be puzzled if you're not happy with that. As I was saying, let's say this country hasn't fully caught up with what nowadays are more common dietary choices and preferences. There is a cultural component to that. A lot of, especially older Italians, don't necessarily understand these dietary restrictions and will sometimes brush them off as, you just being difficult. That being said, as we mentioned, there are now many great restaurants that do largely, if not entirely, plant-based menus and cater much more to vegans and vegetarians. And so searching these places out is a good idea. And if you do find good food, that provides the food that matches your requirements, it's also a good idea to ask them where else they would recommend. Often, like-minded places, will communicate a lot more. And so they may also be a good resource to find other places that will happily cater to you. Happily, there's many vegetarian dishes that are naturally vegetarian in this country. Some of my absolute favorite are melanzane alla parmigiana, so eggplant parm, which is the only version of parm that you're going to find in this country, but that is born vegetarian. In Rome, you have cacio e pepe, one of Rome's most iconic pastas. The name means cheese and pepper, and it's just pasta with pecorino romano, local sheep's milk cheese. We have black pepper, the cooking water from the pasta, and the pasta. So super simple, super delicious, and something that you absolutely should be trying when you come to Rome. Pesto, caprese salad, there's all sorts of dishes that are naturally vegetarian here. And so doing a little research and making sure that there are these kinds of options gets you halfway there, if not all the way. Remember that depending on the type of year, you'll find seasonal vegetable-based dishes. For example, here in Rome, there's lots of artichoke preparations, both in the fall and the spring. And so, carciofi alla romana, which is the Roman style artichoke, which is braised with garlic and mint, white wine, extra virgin olive oil, lots of yummy stuff. Or the carciofo alla giudia, the Jewish style artichoke, which, like a chip or a French fry, has been deep fried twice, are examples of like seasonal vegetable based dishes that you'll find. So it's also a good idea to figure out what is in season in what part of the country and see that if there are any specific dishes based around those. Be aware that there may be hidden ingredients. So many soups and stews, even though they don't contain chunks of meat, can sometimes be made with meat-based broths. So things to keep in mind. Just because there's no meat necessarily listed, or it doesn't seem like it contains it, it may have gotten, let's say, a little flavor boost from some meat-based product or some animal-based product. So once again, double checking is always the best idea.
I was going to say, I'm a bit obsessed with vegetables, and Nasim's, but he's found me the best ones, and I've 50 ways with bitter greens is my my favorite way to eat. And I also, there's so many amazing salads. They do this really good one with oranges and red onion and hazelnuts. And I think I've had that one in Sicily. So good and just so tasty and different that you wouldn't, normally think to make for yourself. I mean, I'm a big fan of the contorni, the sides. I think you can find some hidden gems in there, definitely if you're a vegetarian. And I quite like to eat that way when I'm initially anyway. I'm always on the lookout for those little sides that they're always seasonal.
And it's where you can get some of the best food in this country. Italy prides itself on the quality of the produce, of all of the things that are grown or raised here. And it is true that most anything that is grown or raised within this country tends to be more delicious than its equivalent outside of this country. And it's why Italian food is based on very simple dishes with very few ingredients. So even if, as a side dish, all you see is sauteed broccoli, that sauteed broccoli may very well blow your mind because it's going to be more intensely flavored, sweeter, more delicious, with a nicer texture than anything that you have tried before. And so delving into these vegetable sides, as unexciting as it may sound right now, will normally prove infinitely more enjoyable than one would expect.
And now, Nasim, veganism is becoming very, very popular, but I always hesitate a little bit when we have someone asking if we can cater for veganism on our tours, because it is really quite hard, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, it is a growing trend, but it is still quite a niche market in Italy. So major cities like Milan, Rome, Florence are seeing increasingly more vegan-friendly restaurants, as I was saying. Many young chefs are more conscious about the environment and the negative effect that like mass production of meats and stuff can negatively impact the environment, and so they're offering more plant-based food in general. And so you can find a lot more of that in larger cities. But when you're talking about the little towns, you're traveling around the country, going back to the cultural side of things and how, a lot of these people don't necessarily understand why you would give up meat, won't necessarily be as accommodating or even have dishes that they can serve you. Because cured meat products were one of the only ways that you often had to enjoy meat, to have any meat at all. And so, as we were saying, a lot of, even vegetable side dishes can contain things like anchovies, pork products, maybe finished with a little bit of cheese. Desserts are, rarely vegan due to the use of eggs, honey, dairy products. So it's a little harder to navigate than being vegetarian. But that being said, there are dishes that are naturally vegan. the very famous aglio e olio, which means garlic and oil, and it's just a condiment made by frying garlic, chili flake, and some good extra virgin olive oil. You finish it with a little bit of parsley. Great condiment for pasta. Obviously, the pasta al pomodoro, the regular like tomato pasta. Pizzas like marinara, which is a tomato sauce made here in Rome. It's tomatoes, garlic, extra virgin olive oil, chili flake, and parsley. In Naples, they'll sometimes add capers and olives to that. Pizza con le patate, pizza with potatoes, which may seem like a stodgy mess, but works actually spectacularly well. These are all very traditional dishes that are naturally vegan. And so keeping an eye out for those and seeing if regionally there are vegan dishes, even though fewer and far between, you should be able to find things. For example, here in Rome, we have a dish called pomodori al riso, which mean kind of like rice tomatoes. It's a super traditional Roman dish, one of the only vegan ones I can think of, because Rome does have a very pork and lamb heavy diet. But you take there's a specific type of tomato, these larger ones that you use. You hollow them out. You mix the pulp with rice, parsley, extra virgin olive oil, sometimes even a bit of mint or garlic. You put everything back into the tomato, and then you bake them in the oven with a lot of potatoes until everything is kind of juicy and tender and melty and delicious. And so there are dishes like that that you can search out and will provide you the vegan dishes that you're looking for.
You can definitely do it. I think when it becomes super challenging, if you try and do vegan with gluten-free, I think you'd be really struggling at that point.
Yeah, no, definitely. And low starch, like low carb, these are things that Italians don't necessarily understand or cater to. Once again, it's a cultural thing. But the more dietary requirements you have, the harder it will be for them to accommodate. Because maybe something that might work for gluten-free won't necessarily work for dairy-free, or won't necessarily work combined with, a high-protein, low-carb diet. So yeah, the more complex the list of requirements, the harder it'll be to cater to them. Absolutely.
Some regions, as you mentioned, are better than others. We had a guest on our Puglia tour who, she was able to eat quite well, actually, which is due to, they do have some amazing vegetable dishes there. So I think it's a matter of, as you say, doing your research and finding out what is and isn't possible. So let's move on to dairy, because I think there's pretty good news here, actually.
Absolutely. So dairy, there's more to unpack here. So, for one, there is a difference between lactose intolerance and milk protein allergies. Milk protein allergies are an immune system reaction. The symptoms tend to be allergics or rash, swelling, as well as stomach problems, but this can be life-threatening. And unfortunately, you just have to avoid all foods containing milk. However, luckily, most people that have problems with dairy tend to be lactose intolerant, which is an enzyme deficiency. So the symptoms tend to be more kind of stomach related and causes discomfort. It can also cause inflammation, but they tend to not be life-threatening conditions. And so if you're lactose intolerant, there is hope, because many cheeses actually naturally become lactose free. For one, what is lactose? Lactose is a sugar that's found in milk, and it's the primary sugar in milk, giving a slightly sweet flavor. In cheese making, milk is acidified using either acids like lemon juice, vinegar, or using bacterial cultures that are then coagulated with rennet, which is the enzyme that coagulates milk proteins into curds, so the cheese. And it separates the curds, so the proteins and the fat, from the liquid whey, which is the leftover liquid from the cheese making process, which actually contains most of the milk's lactose. And so although much of the lactose is drained away when making cheeses with the whey that is discarded, some remains in the curds and becomes part of the cheese itself. So depending on how cheeses are made, the eventual lactose content they have, there are certain cheeses that you need to avoid, as opposed to certain ones that you're actually allowed to, or certain cheeses that should not cause any dietary distress. There's three main reasons why cheeses become lactose free. One is bacterial fermentation. So starter cultures like Lactococcus, Lactobacillus, the ones that you find in yogurt, feed on lactose, the sugar, during the fermentation process, converting it into lactic acid. Lactic acid gives cheese its characteristic tangy flavor and reduces the lactose content significantly. It also happens to drop the cheese's pH, making it more acidic and therefore more suitable for preserving. And so it's normally fresh or soft cheeses like ricotta and mozzarella, for example, where the fermentation is a lot shorter, so more lactose remains, and these cheeses aren't then aged. And so there's no time for the bacteria to consume the leftover lactose molecules. And in fact, if you think of the flavor of dishes like other cheeses like ricotta and mozzarella, they tend to be on the quote unquote sweeter side. They're not quite as tangy.
But isn't it like buffalo mozzarella can be eaten, I understand? It's the cow's milk that's the problem.
Yeah, so different milks actually contain different quantities of lactose and will have different molecular structures. And so your body will be able to break them down more easily. But yeah, the main problem, the main culprit to avoid does tend to be cow's milk specifically. And so cheeses made with other milk, like water buffalo milk, as you were saying, or even sheep's milk, goat's milk, tend to be easier to digest in general. So absolutely.
Yeah. When I have tried this life-changing buffalo mozzarella cheese, it was a bit of a relief for some people that were with me that were lactose intolerant, because they could bite into that juicy goodness and have that juice dribble down their chin as well and not feel the pain later.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Fresh buffalo mozzarella should be very juicy. When you cut it open, you should see kind of milk collecting in the bottom of the plate. When you apply pressure, we say it should cry tears of milk. So if you don't see any milk coming out of the mozzarella, yeah, we have very picturesque expressions for food here. It means that the mozzarella is either older than it should be or it's been refrigerated. Buffalo mozzarella is the only fresh cheese that should never undergo refrigeration, and you should eat it within the first 48 hours of production. So even though you can find this cheese in most parts of the world, to export it, it has to be refrigerated legally. So by the time it's been exported, it's been irreparably ruined. And by the time it makes it to your house, after it's sat a day or two on the shelf or in transit, those 48 hours are long gone. So definitely eat as much buffalo mozzarella as you humanly can while you're in this country, because once you go back home, it'll probably never taste the same.
I know. It's very sad. But, it just means you have to go to Italy more than once or twice and just to seek out those cheeses because they're so good.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I just wanted to butt in with that buffalo mozzarella. On you go. Tell us more about the aging process.
Aging also affects the lactose content of cheeses. So during the aging process, cheese undergoes enzymatic and microbial changes. And so the lactose is either eaten by these bacterial cultures, breaking them down into lactic acid or other byproducts, or during the aging process, any remaining lactose crystallizes and becomes inert during the process, and so your body won't actually process it. And so, especially for older cheeses that have aged, they tend to be lower in lactose inherently, even regardless of the initial cheese making process. Some cheeses age faster than others and therefore become lactose free faster than others for three main reasons. One is moisture content. So the drier the cheese, it means there's less whey, that liquid that contains the lactose, and so there's less lactose to start out with. So drier cheeses like Parmigiano, Reggiano, Pecorino Romano tend to already start out with less lactose. There's also bacterial activity. Depending on what bacterial cultures you're using for fermentation, some bacteria are more efficient at breaking down lactose than others. And there's also a question of the cheese composition. So high fat cheeses usually have lower lactose content because the fat displaces the whey. It physically takes up space that the whey would have. And so, cheeses like brie, for example, even though it's not like a dry, crumbly aged cheese, because of the fermentation process and the fact that it has a high fat content, actually means it's one of the cheeses that most lactose intolerant people can eat without any problems. The final reason why cheeses become lactose free, as we just mentioned with the buffalo mozzarella, is the type of milk used. Goat's milk and sheep's milk naturally have slightly lower lactose levels compared to cow's milk, and therefore cheeses made from these milks often have reduced lactose levels even before aging. Italians will, especially in regions where they make lots of sheep and goat cheeses, will tell you that they're more easily digestible. This is true also because of the structure of the fat molecules. So even though sheep's milk and goat milk will contain roughly the same fat content as cow's milk does, the fat molecules are a lot smaller. And so it's physically easier for your body to break them down. And so it makes it more easy to digest whether or not you have any intolerances. And it's actually one of the things that regions like Lazio, that Rome is capital of, where we have a lot of sheep's milk because sheep were the animal that you could raise more easily around here for dairy products. They'll tell you that, sheep's milk cheeses are the best because, they're not only more delicious, because anything that's made locally is more delicious than anywhere else, but it's also more easily digestible. And it's funny, Italians give a lot of importance to digestibility. I kind of half joke that everything in this country revolves around food, and every food decision revolves on digestibility. And it's one of the reasons why, we are able to eat the insane amounts of food that we do on a regular basis. This digestive fixation is a very self-serving one, whose aim is always to allow you to eat more without feeling as bad.
It's a great objective, I think, and you do it very well.
One last thing. There may be lactose in foods that you may not expect. For lower quality cold cuts, there's a sneaky trick that a lot of producers use. They will add lactose, often used simply as milk powder, that are added to normally lower quality cold cuts, as I was saying, such as mortadella and salame. To be clear, the lower quality producers, the traditional mortadella and salami, normally do not have these kind of additives, but they're added to enhance flavor and texture during the production itself. The fermentable sugars in lactose serve as a food source for beneficial bacteria involved in the curing process, which, like in yogurt and cheese, turns lactose into lactic acid, leading to the development of desired flavors and improved preservation. And lactose also tends to contribute to a softer texture in the final product. The more traditional producers will often tell you very proudly that there is no lactose or other funny business added to their cured meats. So most good quality Italian cured meats that are still made in the traditional way do not contain lactose or powdered milk or any of these additives. And another thing that kind of will keep you safer, if you're getting prosciutto crudo, so the cured prosciutto, or things like pancetta, guanciale, that are made from whole cuts of the animal, are typically free from lactose and milk derivatives, because all you have to do to these larger cuts is salt them, maybe spice them, which is also an extra layer of protection from, critters and stuff that may make it go bad. And so lactose normally isn't even part of the equation. So it tends to happen more with like ground cold cuts and cured meats like salame, mortadella, ciauscolo, that kind of stuff.
I mean, why are we doing such weird things to our food to add milk products to? Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion.
It unfortunately is something that, the culinary landscape is changing here too, even though we are, as I said, half jokingly stuck about 40, 50 years behind the rest of the world. that's when food really started getting tinkered with a lot more in the rest of the world. And that's kind of where we are right now. And so, producers that want to make a larger volume of food at a cheaper price will use these sneaky tricks to make you think that you're getting really good quality stuff, but it's not the quality it should be, let's say.
Sneaky.
Yes, unfortunately so. But yeah, we were talking about the scientific side of, lactose-free cheeses. Here's what it means practically. The cheeses that you need to avoid are fresh ones that haven't had a lot of aging time. So things like cow's milk mozzarella, which unfortunately burrata also falls under. Burrata is like that supercharged cousin of mozzarella, curds of mozzarella mixed with heavy cream wrapped in a bag of mozzarella. Things like ricotta or mascarpone, our semi-sweet equivalent of cream cheese. Cheeses like robbiola, stracchino are all fresh cheeses that, do have higher levels of lactose and may not sit well with lactose intolerant individuals. The good news is that there are many cheeses that are probably safe. So Parmigiano Reggiano, Parmesan cheese. Grana Padano, which is kind of the cheaper equivalent of Parmigiano, which is a great alternative when cooking, especially abroad. Pecorino, which is a sheep's milk cheese. So in Italian, pecora means sheep. So any cheese called pecorino tends to tell you that it's a sheep's milk cheese. And so pecorino romano comes from Rome. Pecorino sardo comes from Sardinia. Pecorino siciliano comes from Sicily. All of these, by the time they're aged traditionally and are put out for sale, are all going to be lactose free or have negligent amounts. Whereas, for example, Tuscan pecorino loses all of its lactose as long as it's aged more than 4 months. So something to keep an eye out there. But in general, as we were saying before, sheep's milk cheeses tend to be easier to digest anyway. And then cheeses like Castelmagno, Fontina, Gorgonzola, Taleggio. The last three especially, you can have, say, on pizzas. You just say, don't put the mozzarella, but I'll have, some blue cheese on it. So again, this may confuse the locals that don't necessarily know what cheeses contain lactose and what do not. But it does mean that there's an incredible variety of cheeses and therefore an incredible variety of dishes that you'll still be able to enjoy even if you're lactose intolerant. That being said, test your tolerance. Okay, even with lactose-free cheeses, personal tolerance may vary. It has to do with how much lactose is still in your system, how your body processes it. So start with small portions of each cheese and see how your body reacts to it and kind of go along with that.
Great advice. But I think as well, in Italy, they don't usually serve huge portions of cheeses. Like if you have a tasting of cheese on its own, it won't be massive. It'll be a nice, so you can taste a bit, wait, taste a bit again.
Absolutely.
I think there's over 400 varieties of cheese, and I feel like there's a good chunk of that you can probably try if you're lactose intolerant. And I know Olivia, who is on our team, she is lactose intolerant and she manages to eat a lot of cheese.
And actually, one of the resources that I found a lot of this information with is an association. It's called AILI, AILI. It's the Italian Association for Lactose Intolerant People. And they have like a list of the most famous cheeses that are naturally lactose free. There's a list of DOP cheeses that are certified, traditional food products that have been certified by the Italian government the same way that they certify lots of wines. So that list will be in the notes, and you'll be able to have a more comprehensive list of cheeses that you'll be able to enjoy.
I think people are, really conscious of what they're putting in their bodies these days, and they're trying to adjust. And so we've covered a lot of different things. I think all of us go through phases where we try eliminating things from our diets. But what is the best way to communicate these preferences?
Honesty is key. Anywhere in the world, your server or the person working in the store values genuine communication. So claiming an allergy when it's a dietary preference, I'm not saying requirement, a preference, can be confusing and even frustrating to the person that's kind of serving you. Be upfront about your needs. They'll appreciate the honesty and clarity. I've worked as a server when I was in university. Happened to me a number of times that I would have guests that would say, they're lactose intolerant because they didn't want, say, the cream in their dish, but then you see them eating bread and butter. Or, they'll say they're gluten-free, but then they're, eating their friend's pasta dish. I know it may seem like the staff will be more attentive to your needs if you say it's an allergy and not a personal preference, but you may be shooting yourself in the foot. The opposite may end up happening. And this, unfortunately, will make it harder for the people that actually do have genuine dietary restrictions. Absolutely fine to say that you just don't eat certain foods because you don't like them. So I think it's best to convey that as opposed to saying, I'm allergic to tomatoes because you don't like tomatoes in your food and you think it'll be an easier way for them to just not offer you anything that contains tomato. I'm not saying that there aren't tomato allergies, please don't get me wrong. But yeah, convey your needs, be honest about it, and make sure that you convey the severity of the allergy, And once again, I find that in general, if you're apologetic, not that you should be apologetic about having, dietary requirements, but by being apologetic and making light of the situation, you're taking the responsibility off of, the restaurant, off of the person serving you. And so it makes it an easier request, be like, look, I'm really sorry. I know this is, not the easiest thing for you guys, but I just wanted to double check. I do have these issues. Throwing in a compliment here and there, will also be nice. The Italians love to have their ego kind of boosted. Anyone does, but especially here. And so, being nice about it. Your waiter is basically your link between you and the restaurant. And so if you get them on your team, things in general will go a lot better. Communicating clearly and honestly is, I think, the way to go about this.
Absolutely. That's a general rule for life, I think.
I agree wholeheartedly.
All right. This has been such great information, Nesim. I think everyone who's, like a little bit confused about what to expect in Italy, you get much clearer idea now. Just to wrap things up, what are your final tips for eating in a safe way and enjoyable way when people are in Italy and they're managing these dietary requirements?
There's 5 main things that I would think of. For one, research and plan ahead. Look up allergen-friendly restaurants wherever you're going. There are apps, there's a couple resources I mentioned that will have local recommendations. Do some Google searches as you're leading up to your holiday. It's also a good idea to maybe reach out to the places that you were planning on going and see if they can accommodate. That will make your time when you're actually in the country that much easier because you also won't be scrambling trying to figure out where to eat, who can accommodate. Having, as I said, a general idea is very useful. Plans change, so that's not a problem. Make sure to cancel your reservations if, your plans do change. But research and planning, I think, is the first thing to start with. And you can start even before you're actually traveling. Communicating properly, so using key phrases. Learn the Italian phrases to explain your restrictions. So, sono allergico or sono allergica. I'm allergic to. Questo piatto contiene. Does this dish contain? And by trying to communicate these needs in Italian, locals will definitely appreciate the effort. And so they will be much more responsive and they will be much more prone to cater to your restrictions than if you just try to speak to them in English. Another one, which is very easy here, is embrace simplicity. Stick to naturally safe dishes like fresh salads, grilled vegetables, meats that have simply been, grilled, fish as well. This happens to be where this country truly excels culinarily. Going for simpler dishes that obviously don't have any of the things that may affect you negatively is, a great place to focus on. Flexibility is also key. Focus on what you can eat rather than what you can't. We've covered all sorts of dishes, regional cuisine, things that can easily cater to your requirements. So focus on that as opposed to maybe thinking about all the delicious foods that you unfortunately cannot enjoy. And as you mentioned before, consider traveling based on regional cuisine. Visiting warmer areas where there's an abundance of vegetables, a wider variety of proteins, like more seafood involved, cheeses without lactose being more prevalent in these as well, will provide you with a much wider array of options than you would in regions that maybe focus more on things that you cannot enjoy. By keeping these 5 main points in mind, you'll be able to have an incredible time here, and you'll be able to navigate Italy's culinary landscape while respecting both your health and this country's food traditions and its sometimes quirks.
Yeah, and I mean, think of it as an adventure. And if all else fails, there's one food that you'll find the answer, and it's gelato.
Absolutely. It's true that most fruit-based gelato is actually technically sorbet because it doesn't contain any dairy. And there are also certain flavors, like at my favorite gelateria in the neighborhood, they have this really awesome dark chocolate where they don't add any milk to it. And so definitely gelato is always a good fallback, and will be able to save you in maybe less happy occasions.
A day is always brighter with gelato, and you don't have to have the cone, you can have it in a cup, so that solves your gluten problem too. So that's what I always think. If you're having a bad day, go get a cup of gelato.
Amen to that.
Amen to that. Oh, Nesim, this has been fantastic. I think people get really confused when they think about eating in Italy, especially knowing how many gluten-based products there are, but also if they've got a lactose intolerance, it can be quite stressful. But I'm here to tell you, I don't have any of those, thank goodness, but I love eating vegetables and I love gelato, and, I can go, I don't think I had pizza last time I was in Rome or Italy. Yeah, I don't think I did. So I'll have to rectify that when I'm over there in a few weeks. But, yeah. But in the meantime, I mean, really everyone just go and enjoy and do some research beforehand so you know what you can eat. There's plenty of rice dishes up north as well, risotto, where you'll also not encounter any gluten, amazing. Our friend Maria actually wrote a recent book, and it's called Manja, and so she's got a list of all the regional foods in there that you can go and have a look at too. So thank you, Nesim. How can people find out more about your food tours and join one, and when their bookings are open for 2025 and beyond?
If you would like to book a tour with me, it would be an absolute pleasure to show you around. You can book directly online on my website at fullbellytours.com. Bookings for 2025 will be going live between the end of December and beginning of January. Let's just say first week of January, just to be safe. And if you have any questions, you can email me directly at info@fullbellytours.com. And I will be happy to respond to any queries you may have.
And yeah, do go. It's really fun. And a lot of people that listen on the podcast will be keenly listening into Nesim's voice because they are very fond of him after they've been on tour.
Oh, I forgot. You can also check out my Instagram. My handle is fullbellytours. And I have TikTok as well, although I admit I'm less versed in the TikTok lexicon.
Oh, thank you, Nesim. That's great. And I hope I will be seeing you in Rome very shortly. So everyone, we'll be reporting back. If you keep an eye out on social media, you might see us having a pizza. You never know. We might do that.
Absolutely. In just about a month.
All right. Thanks, Nesim. Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Bye, guys.
So, listeners, that wraps up our discussion about eating in Italy with allergies, intolerances, and food preferences. And I think the key points to take away here are that there are options for you and that the default position does not have to be pizza and pasta. You do need to do some research and plan ahead to have the best experience for sure. But that really applies to most scenarios where you're walking into a culture that may not be 100% set up for your needs. On my recent trip to Italy, I enjoyed a wide variety of foods, including my beloved bitter greens. Honestly, I could eat those by the plateful just on their own. I'm at that stage of life where a focus on protein is important, so moving on to the secondi section of the menu, which is the mains, meant I tried some delicious fish, lamb and beef dishes as a side to those bitter greens. And as always, there is a gelato option for most dietary situations. And apart from gelato, I'd like to give a shout out to Parmigiano Reggiano. I mean, that is the miracle cheese. And, go right ahead and eat that by the chunk if you like. It's delicious. Now, as I mentioned last week, please make sure to work with any tour or activity provider that you want to book and make sure that they are listening to your needs and understand your challenges. Our small group tour team are wonderful at adjusting menu selections for different requirements and go out of their way to make sure that you have a wonderful time enjoying Italian food, as I know that Nesim does on his tours also. If you would like the full transcript and links we've discussed in this episode, as well as Nazim's details so you can book a tour with him, head on over to the show notes on our website at untolditaly.com/260 for episode 260. While you're there, we have hundreds of articles and the show notes for over 250 podcast episodes to help you plan your trip. And don't forget our online travel assistant, Zia, who is there to answer your questions. But if you'd like some more personalised support, our team of expert Italy trip planners are also available to assist. You can book in straight away on our website and we can get started as soon as you have an appointment with us. Thanks for your support of Untold Italy. We so appreciate all of you, our many listeners joining us from right around the world, and it would be so wonderful if you help spread the word so that we can reach more Italy-loving travellers just like you. And the best way that you can do this is by leaving us a 5-star rating or review on your favourite podcast app, whether that be Apple Podcasts or Spotify or something else. Now, next time we're headed to another favourite destination in beautiful Italia. I won't share where just yet, but until then, it's ciao for now.
The Untold Italy podcast is an independent production. Podcast editing, audio production and website development by Mark Hatter, production assistance and content writing by the other Katy Clarke. Yes, there are two of us. For more information about Untold Italy, please visit untolditaly.com.